Okay, thank you, boys. If we could stop reading now and look this way. Okay, yeah, put your books down. Stop reading. Thank you. Okay, so today what we're going to be doing is looking at some techniques to improve your writing about poetry. Uh, we are going to be looking at some poems you've not seen before, I think, and trying to figure out how we could construct PE paragraphs about this poem, meaningful PE paragraphs. So the learning objectives for today are going to be how do we analyze poetry and how do we write meaningful PE paragraphs on those poems. Now, this is a technique really developed with my year 10 class who had to do this at GCSE level in an exam. So it's good practice. There are 5 steps to this system we have, and you should write these down. Step 1 is to read the poem and think. Okay, think, what do you think it's about? The first, just go, instinct. What do you think it's about? Step 2 is look at the title. Now, titles are very important because the poet has given them the title for a reason. And you compare, in step 2, you compare the title with the last line of the poem. And you try and see if you can feel what's the connection between those two things. The third step is to try to identify emotions or feelings in the poem. And the fourth step is then to identify poetic devices, alliteration, simile, so on. But not just identify, you also need to be able to explain why you think the poet used them. And then the final step is to try to identify what the extended metaphor, what is the thing in the poem that links throughout the poem? What does he want us to do? What does the poet want us to draw out of the poem, right? And so that's the idea. And then once we've got all that, we can then start writing some really interesting point, evidence, explanation paragraphs. Okay, so let's try this 5-point method out on a poem. If we turn to page, let's see, it's page 57 of our anthology, we find a very short poem called The Eagle. Let's just get that there. The Eagle. Now, what do? Step 1, we read it. The Eagle. He clasps the crag with crooked hands. Close to the sun in lonely lands, ringed with the azure world he stands. The wrinkled sea beneath him crawls. He watches from his mountain walls, and like a thunderbolt he falls. Okay, so Alfred Tennyson, 1851. So there's our poem. So the first step, we've done the first step. What is it about? Okay, so can someone put up their hand and tell me what they think it's about? Let's look at the second step of our plan, and that is to compare the title with the last line. So, the eagle, and then we have this last line, and like a thunderbolt he falls. So what do you think? What's the connection there? What is the poet trying to do with these two things, the title and the last line? Have a think about that, and if you've got any ideas, let's put our hands up and see what people think. Okay, good. Now let's move on to the third stage, feelings. Can we identify feelings in this poem? And this is really, it's a high-level order task. Can you get a gist of what you think the feelings of this poet is? And I suppose we could phrase it in its relationship to the eagle. So what does he feel about the eagle, this poet? That's quite tricky. Have a think, and then if you have some ideas, you could maybe put your hands up. Okay, now we're going to come to the fourth part of the lesson, and I'd like you now in your table groups to try and identify poetic devices that we see in this poem. Now, it's a short poem, but there's actually quite a few poetic devices buried in the poem. So I'm going to give you each table, try and see if you can identify the poetic devices being used in this text. Good. Okay, I'll give you about 4 minutes, I think, to do that. Off you go. Okay, so you've had a bit of time now on your groups to come up with the poetic devices that the poet is using. I suppose the first one, and I hope you found this. This is relatively straightforward. Is let me see if I can put this to the camera. Is this technique here? What do we call this? We call this alliteration. So you see the repetition of the C's. This is done for effect. It isn't just random. He did that on purpose. So we have alliteration. We also have, and this is fairly straightforward, I would have thought, but we also have rhyme scheme. It rhymes. Each line ends with the same sound. Hands, lands, stands, cruels, wolves, fools. Okay? You should have been able to find that. We also have what I would describe as at least two metaphors here. The wrinkled sea and his mountain wolves. So that's already, we have three. We've got alliteration, rhyme, and metaphor. I think there's at least one more, and this comes in the last line. And this, of course, is the simile, like a thunderbolt. Okay, now we've identified, hopefully you've identified those techniques. But remember, you're not going to get very high marks if you simply identify those devices. You need to talk about why he's chosen to use those devices, and we can come back to that in a moment. Let's look then at the idea of what we call step 5, really, which is this extended metaphor. What is the extended metaphor in this poem? Okay, and I think what we need to do is look again at the text. Here it is, and really think about this extended metaphor. What is repeated? What kind of idea comes out over and over again in this poem? I want you to look at the line that says, he watches from his mountain walls. Perhaps the line, he stands, as well, is significant. So, what does this mean, this mountain walls? I want us to try and see if we can unravel that. So have a discussion on your table. What do you think might be the extended metaphor that's connected to this? Okay, have a little think about it, and we'll take ideas. Okay, so we've had a few ideas about the mountain wall. Let's now look at this simile again, which I think is important. It's in the last line. We may have already kind of discussed it because we discussed the final line, like a thunderbolt. Now, there is a sort of historical reference here that I think it's reasonable to make the association, make the jump. If you can identify the link, I think this can come back to the mountain walls metaphor and help us understand what I think is the message that the poet is trying to send us. So, have a think. What is the significance now of the wall and the lightning bolt, thunderbolt? All right, have a think about it. Put those two together. Think about what you know already about the poem and try and form an idea. You may already have it. I don't know. Let's have a think. Okay, so we're coming to the end of this lesson really now. So I want us to think about, this is my interpretation, okay, and you probably have got something similar. This description of his mountain walls, notice the use of the word his. He owns this. This mountaintop is his. The mountain walls makes me, anyway, associate with a castle wall. He's up on the top of a mountain, which is where you would build a castle. So he's sort of king of the castle. He is the lord of the castle. He's the lord of all he can see. He's up there looking down at the world from his mountaintop. And this could be a castle. So that's for me, what resonates when we read his mountain walls. And when we read the last line, and like a thunderbolt he falls, this is obviously describing him swooping down to take his prey. But the use of thunderbolt is very interesting because you may be familiar with this in terms of Greek mythology, Greek tradition, that we have a character, don't we? The gods in Greece live on Mount Olympus, and they are led by Zeus, and Zeus is the god of sort of god of all powerful kind of a god, and he and this lightning bolt is associated with the lightning bolt. So we move, I think, what he's trying to say is he's moving from being just the eagle as Lord on the top of the mountain to actually being an almost godlike figure. And if you think about it from the point of view of his prey, he does seem to be like a god who can strike down whoever he wishes. So for me, and you may have a different interpretation, but for me, this poem is really, that is the extended metaphor, this Lord stroke God representation of the eagle.